And now what I'm going to do is we're going to end this by playing an interview that I did in part 2. And really the theme of this interview was sovereignty in a world of manufactured war. I explained the mechanisms for how war is manufactured. We explained the programmability. We explained the fiscal dominance. You have to own assets. And we explained the mechanisms for covert wars and where those wars are likely to go to next based upon my understanding of the capital flows and following the money. And so what does that look like in a world of manufactured war? How do you stay sovereign? How do your companies remain sovereign? And how do your countries remain sovereign? And so I was invited, as I said, by somebody that was born in Israel, said that she was ex-IDF, and she left Israel. She was aligned with the left movement within Israel, recognized the occupation, talked about the immorality of the occupation, and also talks about how she believes October the 7th was an inside job that was allowed to happen as well. And so in the interview, we did an interview where I answered all of her questions initially, and then we started to cover what October the 7th was, and various other things. And so I'm going to now play the interview. I think this one's on me. And in part 2, let me know what you think of the interview. Please do put some comments below. And I'm going to be jumping into the live chat, and I'll be engaging in the live chat while you're watching the interview as well. And let me know what you think of the interview. We cover a lot of topics. He asked me, like, son, I've got no idea. Where is my money? Like, where is it? What happened to it? And that kind of defined the rest of my life. And 26 years later, I'm still trying to help people answer that question. In order to progress as a market maker, you need to engage in degeneracy. You need to be out in the drug scene in order to build relationships with the clients that you need in order to get to the next stage. They pay these education system to teach you the shit that poisons our food, turns doctors into drug dealers, and turns economists into debt dealers. It's just a money laundering organization, and the only people that get published are the ones that are attached to a financial agenda. So the whole system's wrapped up in an illusion of democracy, an illusion that your vote matters. It's a pay-to-play system, and the higher you get, the more compromised you have to be. That's what the Jeffrey Epstein files were. People think like Israel rules the world. No, Israel is subordinate to its own corrupt power structure, just like America is, just like UK is, just like the rest of the West is. And the military industrial complex has these blackmail operations and various other things. People think it's like Jeffrey Epstein is like a one-off. There's thousands of Jeffrey Epsteins. There's thousands of them. All of those wars in the Middle East made someone trillions of dollars. The debt is the American person. The value is in the US stock market. And there were a bunch of corruption in the middle that all got their cut for being useful to power. And so Netanyahu doesn't work for the Israeli people. I don't think you fix the world. I don't think Bitcoin fixed the world. But I think it gives you an option to exit. And I think it gives you an option to boycott. And I think it gives you an option to take that energy and channel your money into something that is better.
Hello and welcome to another episode of You're the Voice. I'm Efrat from Bali this time, and I have the honor and pleasure of being here with someone I highly appreciate and follow for the past few years, Simon Dixon. Hello, Simon. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to seeing where we take this one. There's so many directions we could take this, so I'll leave you to direct this.
Yes, there are so many directions, and when I told some of my close friends that I'm having you on, they were like so excited. They said, oh, it's the day, today's the day, this is great, because they definitely see the potential intersections that we can have in the stuff that we're doing. And so for my audience that may not know you, and there may be some that don't know you, because not everyone in my audience are coming from like Bitcoin background or geopolitics. So just a quick intro if I may, Simon is a Bitcoin investor, entrepreneur, geopolitical analyst, and financial expert who moved from traditional finance into Bitcoin after questioning how the system works and following the dot-com crash. He's a Bitcoin OG, has been around since the beginning, and authored the book Bank to the Future. And he invested in many leading crypto and fintech companies at the time. And today he focuses on Bitcoin education, self-custody, and geo-financial analysis, helping people understand the world from the lens of follow the money, which helps people understand the forces shaping our world. And I've been a fan for a long time. And could you share your backstory a little bit, like especially your dad's influence and what became your life's mission and purpose out of that?
Yeah, sure. So for me, my journey in money, which has become a borderline obsessive, unhealthy, very crazy obsession over understanding everything about money. And I don't mean, just the accumulation of money, like that's a part of it, but just actually understanding the essence of the spiritual side of money and the structural side and the effect it has on human behaviors. It started for me 25 years ago. Wow, we're 2026, so 26 years ago now. And it was during the dot-com boom and bust. I was brought up by my father. My mother left at a young age for me, and he was born in the 1933. So during the start of the Great Depression that led into World War II, and he was in a town called Bristol in UK, which was being bombed. He came from poverty. He was the seventh son of the seventh son, and he had, one sister and five brothers. And they were brought up on a bus driver salary, which I just thought was interesting. Although they lived in poverty and they were surrounded by war and in a Great Depression, it was still possible for a bus driver to look after their family and still have, his wife look after the children. So, he came from that extreme, I guess you'd say. You can imagine the psychological impact of living through a Great Depression and going through a world war. And throughout his whole life, he kind of had a chip on his shoulder to make it. And he had a very colorful life, whether it be from gambling to trying to make it in the London scene. He was flatmates with Jimi Hendrix and all sorts of stuff. But, through wheeling and dealing and hustling, going to prison, coming out of prison, he became a self-made millionaire. And for him to hit that $1 million mark, pound mark, was an unbelievable achievement for him. But once he had made it, he hit that retirement age, and I was about 18 at the time, and he decided that his kind of gambling type of mentality went into the stock market. And so he opened a brokerage account and opened an account with a company called TD Waterhouse. Sorry, so much detail here, but I'll carry on and get it faster. And he put all of his money in, and he made a lot of money because it was leading up to the dot-com boom. And then the bust happened and he lost everything. And I remember him having such an amateur understanding of the markets, but because he made so much money, kind of reminds us of crypto people, in a bull market. He just got further and further and further into gambling it all, until eventually he didn't really know much about markets, but he logged into his account and there was virtually nothing left. And I remember it was imagine, how he felt his whole life, from nothing to millionaire to nothing again at retirement age. So he asked me, like, son, I've got no idea. Where is my money? Like, where is it? What happened to it? And that kind of defined the rest of my life. And 26 years later, I'm still trying to help people answer that question. And so my first part of the journey was, well, where do you learn about money? And my father always wanted me to be in business and real estate and stuff like that. But for some reason, the answer that I was indoctrinated into how do you learn about money is to go to university. So I went to university and studied economics, and I didn't get the answer. So I thought I'd give it another try. So I did a master's and didn't get the answer. And then I said, well, what am I going to do? I got to get a job in the city. Now, it was really interesting. The firm, I went to Manchester University to do my master's in North England. And the firm that my father opened his brokerage account, TD Waterhouse, happened to be located in Manchester. So I knocked on the door and managed to just get myself a job as a T-boy in the stock brokerage firm that he lost all his money in. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to figure out what happened to his account and where it all went. And but I managed to get a job as after I got promoted to being a stockbroker. And then once I was a stockbroker, I learned that, okay, money is about selling stocks, and often what you're selling is just narrative and story. And so then I was like, but I want to know how these stocks actually move. And so as I was a stockbroker, I built a relationship with the market makers in the London Stock Exchange that were moving the markets and making prices. And I managed to get myself a job as a market maker. And so then I learned that the whole thing is market manipulation, and you have these traders, which are called sales traders, and their job is to fulfill orders. And often when you're basically, they call it market making, finding prices. But half the time we had a whole book of stocks that were naked short, and we couldn't cover them. And so, that's illegal. But it was still a standard practice. And, I would learn that when you push stories out in the media, it's often to fulfill an order from a large institutional trader like Goldman Sachs that's trying to sell while they make a buy recommendation and so I just learned firsthand that the normal person is always on the wrong side of the insiders.
This is very similar to the relationship between the pharma companies and the media companies. They have this relationship where they pay them so much money for advertisement, and they are lobbying as well. And so they have so much power in dictating what the narrative would be in the media. So they can, sell a defected product, a genetic experiment to the public, and kind of, do a worldwide experiment on everyone just because of that power they have. And it's very similar to how they scam us with money in the financial markets. It's the same system.
And so this was kind of my, moment of discovering that nothing is as it seems and everything is the opposite of how you're told it is. But we have these structures, these institutional structures that we're meant to believe in. But my father didn't bring me up that way, so I kind of questioned everything. But after basically a couple of years of destroying my soul and realizing that in order to progress as a market maker, you need to engage in degeneracy. You need to be out in the drug scene. You need to I just realized that in order to grow, you're eventually going to be engaging in prostitution and all sorts of degeneracy in order to build relationships with the clients that you need in order to get to the next stage. And so I kind of learned about that, Wolf of Wall Street kind of cartoon character. But it's true. And so, I kind of learned about this whole, to grow in that scene. There is layers of what I think we're discovering now. And I didn't see it to the full extent, but I saw the foundation of a compromise network that you have to kind of mutually compromise to grow as you rise to power in these corporate investment banking structures. So I decided that I then was like, well, this is soul destroying. Maybe I should change into understanding how these companies got on the stock market in the first place. So I did my final job in corporate finance. And that was just helping venture capitalists exit their portfolios by taking the companies public. And I kind of was at a smaller investment bank. It was a Danish investment bank, a Dutch investment bank. No, Danish, sorry, KBC. And I started to learn that war is actually a business plan. And when you pitch certain companies that are going public, I kind of saw the inside track in what is being negotiated in a lot of these war zones right now. That to stop a war, you have to make more profit from peace. And that's actually just an algorithm and an equation. And there is a very defined process around this. And so
Destruction.
this was kind of this was kind of my first introduction to the level of detachment from the human spirit that happens within these financial transactions and securitization and financialization process. And until you can come up with, a 10x business plan, then there's more profit from war and various other things. But also just learning, the whole process of securitization and financialization and how a business effectively becomes a product. It starts as something that a founder has a lot of soul in. And slowly you remove all that, replace it with a governance structure. And then once you're at the public stage, kind of regulations and governance takes over what the business was. And then it becomes a tool for selling shares and raising debt and becoming subordinate to a greater financial power that relies upon you working for your share price. And so I kind of understood all those incentive games. And again, I went through my moment. I hope you don't mind doing this level of detail because I think
I love this level of detail, but I'm pausing you for a second just to give you a thought that came as you were sharing this beautifully. I come from tech, 25 years in tech and marketing. And isn't it ironic that, one of your first jobs was like market making? I want to use that term because one of the things that companies or entities need in order to grow and survive is a market. They need a demand from the market. And if they have the product, if they're already in the stage where they have the product, but the market is not ready for them, or the market doesn't have enough demand to justify their growth, they will create the market. They will create the demand. And so, I'm looking at the parallels where I come from in Israel. I've been seeing the market making of war for decades. When there is a relative peace and quiet, they'll create the next thing, the next operation, the next war, the next thing. They just constantly create demand for war. And then the sad thing is that the propagandized people that don't see what is actually happening and what kind of machine is working behind the scenes to create that demand, they then cheer for the arms and weaponry industry that is getting stronger and better as a result of that war or project or operation or whatever is happening. It's like, oh, great, we have demand again for those companies that are coming out of Israel, and that the world now needs our weapons or whatever. And it's not the biggest sector in Israel, but it's one of the, in export I'm talking about, and also local demand, but it's one of the biggest. And it's insane that it's like a self-feeding loop. We create but we kill and destroy in the process.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about your soul being like diminished during those years, that's exactly the process that I felt that I'm going through, or that many people in Israel or in other, obviously in other countries around us are experiencing, that your soul is being corrupted and manipulated so many times to buy this story, the narrative, the self-fulfilling prophecy, that at one point you either become completely numb and zombified to it, which is the state of most people where I come from, or you're like, okay, I'm leaving. I'm opting out. This is ridiculous, which is where I am. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to share that thought with you.
Yeah, I think it's important because, it's an interesting conversation for us because of my activism work against Israel at the moment, and then obviously you've got the direct experience. And we were talking before this that at some stage these conversations need to happen, and the human side needs to come in. So let's carry on.
Yeah.
So that was the entirety of my corporate career. I hit the stage where I just threw in the corporate towel, and it was 2006. So in stockbroking, I learned that everything's about sales with no ethics. In market making, I learned that markets are completely rigged. And in corporate finance, I learned that war is a racket, and securitization and financialization is the process of taking out the soul and replacing it with a power structure that means you're subordinate to your investment bank and your financier. All of that kind of tied into my overarching philosophy of understanding how the stock market works and what drives markets. So I decided I couldn't handle any more of that. And I decided to quit my job, and I wanted to give lectures on money. And in order to teach people how the monetary system worked, I didn't get my answers in university, and I didn't get my full answers in working as an insider in the investment banking. So I obsessively started, I kind of started with a conspiracy theory type of route where I was trying to understand like fractional reserve banking. And at those times, it was like if you would tell people how money's created, you would be called a conspiracy theorist. And so I watched like documentaries like The Money Masters by Bill Still and various others. I read a book by Michael Rowbotham called The Grip of Death. And it started to teach me how the IMF works, how fractional reserve banking works, and how inherently fiat currency is a debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so I decided to, where there isn't actually enough interest in order to pay the debt, so you have to roll over the debt in a perpetual cycle, and that creates these cycles that begins and ends empires. And so I really started to try and understand like the structures and the institutional side of this. And I think I presented at approximately. I started with the colleges and the universities. And I was kind of helping the next generation that wanted to be financiers. And I would always end up like teaching them how money worked. And there were certain institutions that would be very upset with my message. So I presented at London School of Economics. They were really angry at me for, teaching how money actually works. University College of London, they were really angry at me. Birkbeck University, Chicago, when I went and presented there as well.
Was it a guest lecture or you were like a professor?
I wasn't a professor, no. I was just giving lectures mainly around the guises of people like careers and stuff like that. But I would always put in my passion of explaining how monetary reform works. And so at that time, we joined some not-for-profits. And one of them that was in the UK was created from. So we built like this whole, teaching people how money works and how banking works, and we were always focused on the universities. And from that, a not-for-profit called Positive Money came, which was basically educating people on how to reform money. This is actually really interesting because the person that worked for my company at the time, he went and created a not-for-profit called Positive Money. And we ended up in very different directions. The first conference had myself, Richard Werner, and a guy called Ben Dyson. And I'll come back to this later. But at some point, I went down the Bitcoin route. Richard Werner started saying Bitcoin's a scam and it was created by the CIA. And he ended up in the quantitative easing route. And he worked for the Bank of Japan and various other things. And Ben Dyson ended up going down the digital money route and ended up working for the Bank of England in their central bank digital currency initiative, and then left to work for the Bank for International Settlements to create their Enbridge, central bank digital currency payment route. So three of us kind of went in very different directions. And it all came from those early like monetary reform conversations. But in UK, the monetary reform community before Bitcoin was basically a bunch of pensioners that were trying to figure out how do we return to a gold standard. And the conversations were just, the average person was like age 60 to 70. And we used to meet every year in this place called Bromsgrove in Birmingham. And nothing would ever happen. Like people would write books explaining how money would work. And I was a young whippersnapper that was trying to say, right, how do we change the world? Very ignorant at the time. And so I said, like, well, look, let's engage in politics. So I was invited to House of Lords. I was invited to Parliament at this time. And the financial crisis happened, started 2007, 2008. And suddenly, like, a few people in a room turned to hundreds of people in a room. And then they were doing, like, inquiries into what happened during the financial crisis. And so I was invited to come and speak at these types of events. And I thought all I needed to do was get politicians to understand how this system works. And then they change it. Then I realized that actually the sponsors of the inquiry was the banks. And so Sir John Vickers, who was a banker and a sir and a lord, was the person that was inquiring the banks, and yet he was sponsored by the banks. And so I kind of learned that, oh, wow, governments don't work for the people. They work for their lobbies. And so, I discovered that I'm trying to persuade the government to change the banks, and they are effectively bought by the banks. And so I learned the utter hopelessness that you can't change. There's no political solution because the people that control the government are the same people that benefit from this system. And so that was a realization. So now we've done university, we've done every career I could get. Then we realized politics doesn't have a solution. So then I was like, okay, what about entrepreneurship? Maybe that's the answer. My father brought me up to be an entrepreneur. How did I end up in academic? How did I end up in, in a job? So I kind of tried to go back to my route. And my wife was working in commercial banking. I was working in investment banking and had left. And we decided, why don't we create a bank? And so we thought that would be a good idea. And so we said, right, I've got an idea. Let's just show the government what a non-fractional reserve bank looks like. And so we were like, okay, sure. So we pulled together all of our last savings, and we decided to create a bank. And so this is when we formed a company called Bank to the Future. It was in the UK. And we said, right, what do we need? Well, we need a team of people that have created a bank. And so we recruited some of the people that worked for a bank called Metro Bank. And the reason we recruited them is because in the last 100 years, prior to this whole technical stuff, only one bank had been approved to get a banking license. And it was to have direct clearing into the Bank of England. There was only 4 banks, and a 5th bank was added. And that was Metro Bank. And so we managed to actually recruit the team that applied for the license and made it all happen. And I was thinking, okay, all you need is the team that know how to do it. Then you'll get the license. And so what I shortly realized is that, no, I wasn't in the right circles. And the reason they got a license is because they came from a family of elites and they agreed to submit to how the system works. I wasn't in that club. And so I put together the best team we could, and we got the meeting in order with the regulators to find out what we needed to do to get this banking license. And so one of the first thing that happened is myself and my wife came in, and they looked at my wife, and I'll never forget this. They said, "You're not the type of person that we would normally regulate." And so immediately that was like, okay. And we presented our business plan. And the long and short of it is they said, well, to continue this application, we're going to need 60 million at the Bank of England in a Bank of England account. And you're going to have to get an agreement with a bank to build on top of their bank. And so I was like, yeah, but we want full reserves. We want, we don't want to rehypothecate. We just want to create a safe storage for people's money. We want them to direct the flow of their money. We want to charge a fee for offering that. And we don't want to rehypothecate. We don't want to make money, through debt. And they said, yeah, fine, you can do that, but you have to put the money at Barclays Bank and build on their technology, and they rehypothecate for you. So I was like, okay, so what you're saying is that we get the problems with full reserve, but we're still fractional reserve. And they said, yes, of course. And so it turned out that even if you want full reserve and you want to have people custody their money, it's actually impossible. You have to build on top of a fractional reserve bank. You have to have 60 million to start the process. And there are a type of people that they give license to. And we weren't in that club. So I thought, okay, so you can't create a non-fractional reserve bank through entrepreneurship. Maybe you can do it through technology. And so at this time, there was a movement of fintech companies. And one of the companies was called Zopa, and it was a peer-to-peer lending platform, started in 2006. And basically you could people could pull their money and then you could lend it. And, that was kind of the mechanism, but then they had to have the money at a bank, and then therefore it would be engaging in fraction. So what I realized is there's no exit. Like whatever technology you come up with, and you still are built upon this system, and there is no way of exiting that system. So that cost me everything, and we went deep in debt. And I decided to write a book, and that was Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. And I was explaining what needs to happen to change this system. And that brought me in the sphere of digital currencies and various other things. And again, this isn't a short story, but I hope this is okay. Like going down this route.
Of course, go on.
So the next phase was as I was writing the book, I got a message. This is 2010 at this stage. I got a message from a guy that was part of the monetary reform community, and his name was Johnny Bitcoin. And Johnny Bitcoin messaged me and said, hey, Simon, I've decided I'm not going to be involved in any of that stuff anymore. But I've moved out of my house. I've sold my house, and I've moved into a squat on Old Street. With these people that are working on the code of something called Bitcoin. It's the future of money. Why don't you come and check it out? And so this is when I met some of the very early Bitcoin developers, like Amir Taki and various other people. And they were in a squat in Old Street. And I included Bitcoin in the book and started looking at all these different aspects of how Bitcoin worked. And Amir Taki was running a conference in Prague in 2011, and he invited me to speak. And there was like Max Kaiser there and, various other people. And, I was watching the price of Bitcoin at this stage. It went, at the time of the conference, it went from $30 to $3. So we had a 90% correction and crash. And then, just met the Bitcoin community. And then because I was writing the book, I wasn't skeptical about Bitcoin because I was looking for an exit to build a bank. And so I was very receptive to how it worked because I realized this is actually an exit.
Yeah.
And so that was my first introduction to Bitcoin. My wife, we didn't have enough money because we were just deep in debt at this stage. We were about, it was a massive amount for me at the time, but we were about £250,000 in the hole, just trying to get this business plan moving. Neither of us had a job. And she said, let's take our last bit of credit card debt and go to this conference in Prague. And it turned out to be a really good decision.
Wow, your wife is super cool.
Yeah. And so, that was bought the first Bitcoin at $3, but understood the structure. And that was when really the thesis came out. It was that this is money you can own. It's a self-custody.
Yeah.
This is money you can spend without permission.
Yeah.
So peer-to-peer. And there's actually a monetary policy attached to this, which is there's a fixed supply. And so realized that, okay, this is where we should spend all of our time and attention. And that was my first introduction to Bitcoin. And then at the conference, there was a guy called Tony Galippi pitching a company called BitPay. And Max Kaiser and myself ended up investing in it because the price of Bitcoin went up. And we decided, well, let's make this more usable for people. And so there were all these companies. And later, Max and myself created the first Bitcoin venture capital fund called Bitcoin Capital. And then we went through this whole journey all over again in Bitcoin. So we pivoted Bank to the Future, realized you can't create a bank. So why don't we create a securities business? And basically we ended up at Bank to the Future, we ended up kind of creating, as crazy as it sounds right now, but in retrospect, I understand what we created. We created like the BlackRock of Bitcoin companies, which is that we were pooling together our money and everyone else's money in the Bitcoin community and then investing in these Bitcoin companies. But we would structure it as a special company in Cayman Island, an SPV. And then we would end up with the voting rights. And so we'd end up having influence over these companies because no venture capitalist was interested. There was no one in our industry at the time. And so, we ended up realizing, okay, so through these structures, you end up influential over the company to a certain degree, depending on the more you invest. We were investing our money and you pull together other people's money. And later we ended up investing in over 100 companies in the industry, from Coinbase, Kraken, Bitstamp, Bitfinex, BitPayzer to help Bitcoin payments in Africa, Bitso to help Bitcoin payments in Mexico, AirTM to help Bitcoin payments in Venezuela and Argentina, UnoCoin to help Bitcoin transactions in India, and just trying to help all these different parts of the ecosystem set up. And they all started as Bitcoin companies and then ended up as shitcoin companies. And the ones that succeeded to the highest degree ended up effectively, on the market, like Coinbase. It ended up going public at like 100 billion valuation. But once you're there, you become just a tool for the banks because you have to be subordinate to the banks, and you end up becoming a bank. And so I saw the whole ethos of how the financialization and securitization just drives you into propping up the existing system. And through regulation and compliance, the mission kind of went from let's help a bunch of Bitcoin companies to, all right, now we need to do AML, KYC on suspicious activity reports and Bank Secrecy Act. And from just trying to help Bitcoin companies raise finance and be a securities business, you realize that you're just captured into the system.
Yeah.
And so 90% of my time ended up on surveillance, AML compliance, suspicious activity reports, preventing money laundering. And if I got it wrong as an executive, you go to prison. And so you realize that, and you have to, you're not allowed to be transparent about these, So I saw how the system's just so captured that the second you create a centralized company, you then need to answer to investors, and then you need to get a license. And once you get a license, you're in the system and you can't exit the system. And so that was my experience. Eventually, after raising finance for all these companies, Coinbase became so big that we ended up selling our company to Coinbase, but keeping much of the assets and became just an asset manager. But we didn't want to raise finance because any more companies, because I saw everything. We ended up investing in companies that became scams, companies like Celsius that I think were deeply connected to intelligence ops, and saw everything you could possibly imagine just by investing in a portfolio of 100 companies and running a regulated company. So anyway.
Today you don't invest in any Bitcoin company? You're not an investor?
At the moment, I've hit the stage where I want to cleanse myself of all companies because I saw so much and got burnt by so many people and saw the corruption that happens in order to grow in this sector as a centralized company, I learned that you start as your original mission and you end up subordinate to what I call a financial industrial complex. And I saw how Silicon Valley were tools of control, and the public markets and the debt capital markets are tools for leverage and subordination. And I kind of learned how systemically and architecturally, in order to succeed as a centralized company, you become a cog in a wheel and a part of the machine. And so, I decided that I would divest myself from as many of these companies, and that's kind of like where where I am at this stage.
Do you think, I mean, you recently had a conversation with like Jeff from EgoDeath, for example. Do you think that some of the Bitcoin companies that exist today, they are also in this swamp, or they have a level of freedom, relative freedom, because their investors are Bitcoiners as well?
Look, if you succeed as a centralized company, you will eventually be Tether. You will have to deal, the more you succeed, you will have to deal with investment banks. You will have to subordinate to banks in order to get your fiat on ramps and off ramps. You will have to subordinate to regulators that will turn you into surveillance machines. You will also, if you want to rise in getting access to the real capital, you'll be involved in blackmail operations and degeneracy operations and compromise operations. Eventually, they'll put transactions through your platform that means that you either end up in prison or you become a tool for power. And that's the reality of how it works. And so if you're running a financials, or you'll stay decentralized and you'll end up in, either you manage to do it as Satoshi did it, or you'll end up in the same place that the Samurai wallet people ended up. And so it is a very chilling effect. And if you want to work with government, I did the whole government thing. So we put together a Bitcoin bond backed by Bitcoin mining in Iceland in 2014. We tried to give a Bitcoin strategic reserve and legal tender strategy to the UK, and ended up getting booted out of the country, ended up having, being targeted by the political elite in order to shut down our company. I had to leave the country, ended up moving to Hong Kong and reincorporating in different jurisdictions to survive. Tried to do the same on the Isle of Man. I got the whole government to make Bitcoin legal tender. The Bank of England contacted the government and said, we're going to remove clearing to your island if you do this. So I realized the Bank of England is, a higher up of the structure, the power structure. I just started to develop an understanding of how real power works. Tried to support Bukele in the Bitcoin bond. I don't really tell my story, but got myself on the wrong side of IMF economic hitmen and understand that there are real powers, real powers. And you understand how these mafia networks work.
Yeah.
And so you may be allowed to do a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but you have to negotiate with a mafia in order to be able to do that. And there is a whole hierarchy, So all my experiences with doing that for government made me realize that, countries have choices. They either go down the Venezuela route and look what happens there, or you go down the subordination to greater power route, IMF, technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and you might be able to achieve something like Bukele achieved. But the ultimate power structure is still there. And until you build sovereign wealth for you as an individual. Now, here's the beauty. Bank to the Future never needed Silicon Valley money because we put Bitcoin on our balance sheet from the beginning. And we managed our money where the gains in Bitcoin meant we could avoid raising finance, and we had a small group of ideologically aligned investors. But there were attempts to try and get us into that Silicon Valley infrastructure, and we didn't need it. We didn't do it. We decided to grow organically using Bitcoin on the balance sheet, and we maintained independence until the whole regulatory side kicked in.
Okay, so stop there for a second. So
Yeah.
this is a way. I'm looking for a ray of light, for hope, for the Bitcoin startup ecosystem, for them to continue to bloom. Is there a way? Are you saying that is maybe the way? Maybe if they hold Bitcoin on their reserves and then they bootstrap and they don't have to have dependency on VC money, etc.
So you got to deal with the regulations. You got to deal with the banking.
Yes.
You got to deal with the funding.
Yes.
You got to be in a jurisdiction where you get a degree of autonomy as an individual, in a jurisdiction where your corporate structure has a degree of autonomy, and then you got to hedge with multiple jurisdictions.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's very hard.
It's a complex game.
Yeah. And I've seen 100 different companies go through that, and I went through that, and eventually you need to play jurisdictional arbitrage. And if you're going to use a corporate structure, then we avoided going public. We ended up selling our company to those that were going to go public. We maintained the assets, and we set up a structure whereby effectively, without doing business, we could just manage those assets, and the operating business was taken away, in order to do that. But Bitcoin on the balance sheet was what kept us independent and sovereign. And so me as an individual, I became sovereign because of Bitcoin. The company remained sovereign because of Bitcoin. But if you do the whole Bitcoin treasury company, you're a bitch of Wall Street. You're raising equity capital from the investment banks. You're raising debt finance from...
that's a different game. That's the distinction. Yeah, that's very different.
And you're buying Bitcoin, which means you're playing the game of centralizing Bitcoin for power. And centralizing Bitcoin for power is an attack vector on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so there's a reason why Wall Street wanted to create as many Bitcoin treasury companies, and nodes like Cantor Fitzgerald were deployed in order to do that. And we're seeing Cantor Fitzgerald, connected to Howard Lutnick, and he's someone that's under fire right now because of his connections to compromised networks like Jeffrey Epstein.
Of course.
Okay. And
wait. We're going to get to Bitcoin more, because I have other stuff that I want to ask you about, and I'm looking at the clock and I'm like, fuck, I only have like an hour left with you. So I want to take you to a few other directions, and then we'll get back to Bitcoin later, because it's so natural for us to just get there. Okay, so how do you see it? You always say that you don't think there's a cabal, but a complex web of relationships, incentive structures, etc. And you talk in your work about the military-industrial complex, the financial-industrial complex, and the technological-industrial complex. I highly recommend people who haven't heard, this is the first time you're hearing those terms, to go to Simon's YouTube and just, watch any one of his videos. He's explaining that. I don't know if we have time to go deep into it, but you can maybe give like a high-level overview on what that is. But do you think that many world leaders, like I'm calling them world leaders, are coordinating deals and dependencies behind the scenes and presenting one narrative publicly, while as they do that, the real multipolar world order is shaped quietly behind the scenes, like through these relationships? So is that how you see things, basically?
Yeah, so I just kind of described how subordination works at the corporate structure. The same thing happens at the government structure. So governments need funding. They have a few mechanisms for funding. They can print money, which makes you subordinate to the central bank, which has its own hierarchy. Most central banks are members of the Bank for International Settlement. The Bank for International Settlement is its own country, jurisdiction, army, and police force, located in Switzerland.
Basel.
And which has a global structure of coordinating global fiat currencies. And so you have a central banking structure and money printing at the banks. So the banks get to create your currency every time they issue a loan. So you have subordination to a central banking structure, depending on how you structure your central bank, and the banks that create your fiat currency through fractional reserve banking. Those are two leverage points. You then also have bonds, so you can sell government debt to the people, but that makes you subordinate to an investment banking structure. So now you've got an investment bank, a commercial bank, a central bank, and then who ends up buying your bonds? Well, they end up normally massive, large pools of capital like pension, endowments, which makes you subordinate to the asset managers. Who are the largest asset managers? That's BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. So now you're in the Western financial industrial complex and sovereign wealth funds. And so, and whoever ends up buying your, wealthy, rich individuals within your own oligarchy within your country. And so within your own oligarchy within a country, you tend to have the underworld, the shadowy world, you have the rich oligarchs, and they end up buying your bonds in order to influence power. And so then they have an overarching structure. So overarching, your country works for your bondholders, your investment banks, your commercial banks, and your central banks. Then you have a mechanism for funding Congress, Senate, judicial, whatever it may be. That normally comes from lobbies, and lobbies have terms and conditions. They don't just give money because they're trying to support their country or they want favors. And so every politician is funded by a lobby, and those lobbies say, here's your goal, I'll give you some money, and if you achieve your milestones, I'll give you more money. And so all politicians become prostitutes for this power structure. Then you need other factions of power. So you got the money. What else is powerful? Well, you have energy. If you're blessed with energy, if it's oil or resources or gold or whatever it may be on your land, then you either get on the wrong side of a foreign military, which regime changes you to get access to your resources, bombs you and blows you up to gain access to your resources, destroys your currency to gain access to your resources, installs a dictator to gain access to your resources, funds a covert militia group to destroy your country in order to get access to your resources, or you are able to negotiate with this power structure by keeping your resources and putting it in a sovereign wealth fund and partnering with this financial industrial complex. So if by some miracle you don't get assassinated, killed, regime changed, destroyed, currency warred, if you play the game well enough, then the best you get is to keep your resources, put it in a sovereign wealth fund, and partner with the financial industrial complex, where the transactions you do together means that they don't kill you. And by kill you, I mean the empire, this central banking empire that is able to use its financial weapons of mass destruction to subordinate every company that goes public, every company that raises Silicon Valley financing and compromises up the network. And so then you have resources and choke points. And people want to steal your resources and your choke points. Why? Because they want to take your assets, use fiat currency to gain access to the power to take those assets, and then store it at gold at a central bank. So all they wanted was hard money in the end, but they used your resources and fiat currency to steal your hard money. But everyone's in a game of monopoly to try and end up with all the gold in their central bank. And you have sovereign wealth and debt and capital markets to try and steal it. It is kind of the game. So some of that money goes into a military industrial complex. And that military industrial complex is pitched as acting in the country's defense. But it's actually co-opted by corporate power. And so if you want some oil, Chevron and Exxon and the lobbies can say, hey, Senate, Congress, and blackmail via the deep state for judicial, go get me some Venezuelan oil. And the military industrial complex is deployed. Now, military industrial complex is a racket in itself because the US stock market in the post-Bretton Woods world order was propped up by this military industrial complex. And so if you've got a debt-based Ponzi scheme where the government is subordinate to bondholders and bondholders are funding both sides of an ideological war, let's call it capitalism and communism, then you can burden all the people with the debt. We got $38 trillion of debt right now. And you can control where it goes, Pentagon budget, lobby, and push it into the US stock market to help Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon. And you can structure it through financialization and securitization, which helps JP Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America. And then you can take all of people's money that you're pooling together through fund management. And it helps BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard manage all this portfolio, get 20,000 board seats on every single public company. And how does a corporate structure work? You have an executive team. These are the entrepreneurs that you think rule the show. They work for the board. The board is there to protect the shareholders, and they're for shareholders. And the board works for the shareholders. So it's the shareholder class that rule. And a company like BlackRock and an asset manager can pull together everybody else's money. It's kind of like we did at Bank to the Future, to get on the cap table, to then have strategic influence through shareholding. And then if you get enough shares, you control the board. And if you control the board, you control the executives. And if you build a derivatives complex and a media complex and an ETF complex, you control the markets. And so if they don't do what you say, you crash their share price. You push out media. You use a derivative complex in order to make them poor. Why? Because where is most people's net worth? It's paper net worth. It's not real net. It's not gold. It's not Bitcoin. It's not cash. It's securities. And what do? Someone like Elon Musk, you allow them to borrow against their securities to buy a platform like X, as long as you give them all the data and turn it into a social credit score in the end. And will allow you to use the media to manipulate the narrative to make people think that you're giving them freedom of speech. When in reality, you're getting people to talk to feed an AI algorithm to prop up real power. And if you don't do it, well, we're going to start mentioning you on the Epstein files. Or if you don't do it, we're going to crash your share price. And if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to borrow against your stock. And so it is all leverage. And so the whole illusion of net worth, again, is a subordination structure for power. The higher your net worth in this structure, the more subordinate you have to be in power in the world of financialization and securitization. But if you own actual hard money, Bitcoin, sovereign hard money, self-custody, then who do you answer to? You answer to, yeah. And if you have gold in self-custody, who do you answer to? Well, you answer to the structure of custodians because it doesn't scale. You know, you can't take a giant amount of net worth, and some people could build their own bunker or whatever it is that they do to own it in self-custody. That doesn't scale well, particularly if you can't co-opt a government and you need to leave. Or you just put it in somebody else's structure and then you become subordinate to the custodian. And the custodian's going to then leverage it to create more paper contracts and more derivatives. So all this to say is that it is in the exit that you're able to exit the system. Everything else is an optical illusion that draws you into a power structure. So I talked about the military industrial complex.
Yeah.
Where does the military get its money? Pentagon budgets, financialization and securitization, stock value. So who do they answer to? You know, if you want a Pentagon budget and you're Lockheed Martin, you buy the politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the money, you get $1 trillion budget that's now going to be increased to $1.5 trillion because you own all the politicians. And in order to maintain that share price and gain access to the debt capital markets and the equity capital markets and the derivative complex, you answer to the banks. And so the banks control the military. They also control the technology companies. That's the technical industrial complex. Now you can have blackmail through data and algorithm, through surveillance. And these tools, these platforms are weaponized against us in order to create effectively this surveillance state. Now, what does power want? The power wants programmable money with a social credit score and artificial intelligence integrated military grade technology, financial weapons of mass destruction. So look at America right now around the Trump administration. Who's doing stablecoins and AI? David Sachs. He came from the PayPal mafia. Who's doing social credit score on the name of freedom of speech? Elon Musk, PayPal mafia. Who's doing AI contracts integrated into Ukrainian drones? Occupation as a service in the West Bank using Palantir. Genocide as a service in Gaza using Palantir. Splitting up Ukraine for Russia and BlackRock, Palantir. Creating a pre-crime arrest police state in UK, Palantir. Doing crowd control and annual Hajj surveillance in Saudi Arabia, Palantir. Doing border control in America under the guise of immigration, open borders, closed borders, Palantir. Who's doing all of the European Union, stirring up racial tensions? All right, so X is trying to say, all these different religious tensions, racial tensions, white nationalist movements. These platforms, these social media platforms have become platforms for galvanizing radicalized ideology. You and me know exactly what happens when you galvanize a radicalized ideology and you feed them lies and mistruths. You know what that is. That is Israel and Palestine right now.
Yeah.
These algorithms are doing it to everybody right now. Let's say you're a white nationalist. You get put in the Nick Fuentes algorithm and all of your ideology pushes you down that route. Maybe you're a very extreme radical Zionist. Maybe you're believing that Iran is there just for Palestinian rights. You'll be pushed into the algorithm where it radicalizes you further into the most extreme version of yourself. Look at Democrats, Republicans, conservatives. It's laughable at this stage if you think that changing the politician changes the system. Yeah. And if you think that it's the radical left, socialist, communists that are your problem, and that, or you think that it's the fascist, extremist, conservatives is your problem right now, you don't know how power works. There is a unipower, and it is money that determines it. Everything. If you want to fund a militia group, it requires money and control of media to radicalize an ideology. And who do they work for? Who do these armies work for? You think you're working for nationalism in your country. No, you're working for JP Morgan. You're working for Lockheed Martin. You're working for General Dynamic. You're working for BlackRock. You're working for Palantir. Because the biggest weapon that they have is extremism and radicalized ideology, weaponizing religion and racial tensions in order to make you think that you're more moral when you're a useful idiot for power. And how do they reward you? They take your money And when you borrow to get a mortgage, you help the bank create some dollars. And you end up with the debt and they end up with the real estate. They own the real estate until you pay the mortgage. Then you've got to pay it 5 times over in interest. And if you don't pay that interest, you'll find out who owns the real estate. Okay? They get to create money just by you becoming a collateralized debt obligation. You are a product of debt. They need you working to pay your interest and never repaying your debt. Because if you repay your debt, the money comes out of the system and they need to find another useful idiot. So you are just simply a collateralized debt obligation. You are a mortgage-backed security. And then how do they pay the interest? Well, they need you to contribute to your pension so that they can pull together all the money. And then they buy these mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligation with your pension, with your insurance premiums, and with your overpriced education and endowment fund that they pay these education system to teach you the shit that poisons our food, turns doctors into drug dealers and turns economists into debt dealers. You know, they control the education system through these. It's just a money laundering organization. And the only people that get published are the one that are attached to a financial agenda. You know, so the whole system's wrapped up in an illusion of democracy, an illusion that your vote matters. It's a pay-to-play system. And the higher you get, the more compromised you have to be. That's what the Jeffrey Epstein files were. Now, what's the technical industrial complex? It is, as we said, it is the weaponization. What is all this technology originally created for? You think they just gave us iPhones and social media? Every single component in our iPhone, in the technology that we have to use, in our artificial intelligence, was originally innovated for killing people. And it required the quote unquote radical terrorists that are forced to fight these ideologies to steal resources across 6 continents to get the rare earth minerals, to get the energy, to get the components, to get the commodities that were effectively only achieved through death, destruction, genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, weapons trafficking, humans trafficking. You think these mafia networks operate without government? That's what the intelligence agencies get this money for. It's black op operations. They're trafficking our children in order to prop up a debt-based Ponzi scheme, in order to maintain power, to leave you with all the debt. Your job is to get all the debt, the national debt, the corporate debt, the individual debt. While they pump it all into the stock market, US stock market, 92% own, 92% of stocks are owned by 10% of the people. That are the very same people that you're seeing listed in an Epstein file that are part of this compromise. So fiat currency is a proof of weapons network that weaponizes media, that weaponizes pharmaceuticals, that weaponizes technology, that weaponizes finance, that weaponizes military in order to roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And what are they, you nationalists, what are they going to do to your country? Once they bankrupt the government? What did the Bank of England do to the British government once they bankrupted it? They changed the empire. They reset the order. They put all the gold in the Federal Reserve rather than at the Bank of England. They create wars. They profit from the transition. And then they rebuild. And they rebuild back a surveillance state. So the entire fiat currency system is propped up by crimes against humanity in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that leaves you with all the debt and the power with all those that control the assets. It's a game of Monopoly. Everybody ends up with the debt and a few people end up with all the real estate. And then they convert that real estate to hard assets, which is what they wanted in the first place. That was a short answer, wasn't
it? That was a perfect answer. I have so many follow-up questions to that, but I'll just do 1 or 2 of them. Do you think that there is any nation state today that is either not compromised or just compromised minimally, like the least as possible by those factions, or is the whole world screwed up? Is El Salvador or Bhutan or some of those places, do they have relative sovereignty, or is everyone fucked up in the same way?
You gave the right word, relative.
Yeah, it's all relative.
Yeah. So we tend to go into, our brains have been trained into extremist ideology. We're either on the left or the right. It's either good or bad. There's no such thing in geopolitics. There's and with sovereign as well. I'm sovereign to the degree that I do things to become more sovereign.
Yeah. But we can't be 100%.
But I'm still subordinate to my government structure.
Yeah.
I'm still subordinate to a structure that means that I still own my property and it doesn't get stolen. So we all have degrees of power, no matter how sovereign. All we're trying to do is be more sovereign. Are we more sovereign or less sovereign with our decision making? And that's kind of the radar that people need to think about. So how do you become more sovereign? Well, you have a central banking system that opts out of the Bank for International Settlements control grid.
Is there such a country today? Who?
PBOC is one of those in China. So PBOC works under its own structure because it has community banks that create money. That money then fuels a sovereign structure that is then reinvested in its own people. That now some people would call that socialism or would call it communism. Pick your whatever you want to do it. But that's an independent structure for creating fiat currency and being utilized to reinvest into your own people rather than working for bondholders that then props up foreign. So if you're investing it in treasuries, then you're propping up the dollar, which is the kind of the host of this proof of weapons network at the moment, in order to create the military that makes you subordinate. So your money is propping up a foreign military to make you subordinate to their structure. Or you have your own central banking structure in a fiat currency world. Yeah. You then have your resources. Do your resources remain and go into a sovereign wealth fund? Yeah. That sovereign wealth fund is your defense against foreign forces by using co-investments in order to ensure that your country has some leverage when it's negotiating with the financial terrorists. And you have to negotiate with them because they will destroy your currency. Yeah. They will steal your resources. They will regime change you.
That's right. You had one of your recent episodes is like 5 currency wars, which I highly recommend people go and watch on your YouTube, where you just outline how right now we are witnessing 5 currency wars in different places around the world, where they're just coming in and sabotaging the country through the currency, right?
Yeah, including the internal civil war to create a technological industrial complex surveillance state stablecoin versus a legacy structure and, the technification of the Federal Reserve System under a different guise. So you have sovereign wealth through resources, you have central banking, and then you have your ability to resist against it. If you rely upon somebody else's military, if you rely upon somebody else's resources, if you rely upon somebody else's strategic choke points, the best you have is using your sovereign wealth in order to do a transaction that ensures you're not on the wrong side of the military industrial complex. That's the best you can hope for.
So in El Salvador, for example, they rely on the Federal Reserve for their money. They don't have their own currency even. So that's not a very high level of sovereignty in that case?
No, dollarization is complete subordination. And you resist it with a Bitcoin strategic reserve sovereign wealth fund.
Right.
But when I wanted to support President Bukele in launching a Bitcoin-backed bond, there was a whole reason why that didn't happen. And that didn't happen because you have to work for your bondholders, and your bondholders have other power structures.
Got it.
And so, there is just degrees of... Yeah. And if you want to know who's playing the game best, then what you do is you look up, do a chat GPT and list all the sovereign wealth funds that have the highest assets under administration. The best in Europe is Norway. The Middle East have a bunch of sovereign wealth. The best in the world is China in terms of their ability to dictate their future. And then you have different degrees, per capita and different other things. But the ones that are playing the game the best, that are the most free, are the ones that have the largest sovereign wealth fund. That doesn't mean complete.
And that doesn't mean that the people inside that nation have freedom.
No, so you got your country, right? So the island that I chose to live in, it's illegal to take on debt. So we have zero bonds and zero debt. What are the implications of that? And by the way, this doesn't scale. So, the reason I do it, I found that my realization in the world is that community doesn't scale. As it gets bigger and bigger, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker. As the community gets smaller and smaller, it has the real bond and the real and so we've leveraged community to social media, but it helps. But the real community is still your small community around you of the people that are actually, I have to live on this ground. Are we going to turn this ground in my local area into a shithole, or are we going to work together to make it better? Okay. So there's kind of that factor. So I know that all money that I contribute and pay in tax goes to not interest, not bondholders, not debt holders, which is other people's agenda. Think of the level of debt, the degree of subordination you are to power in the financial industrial complex. So America has $38 trillion of debt. It has to, right now, it has to favor its bondholders over its currency. So it is removing world reserve currency for its bondholders. That's what's happening in America right now. It's not autonomous. It's the least sovereign country in the world. It is fully subordinate to corporate power and foreign power. It's got $65 trillion of foreign ownership of assets. There's no people that think that Trump can make decisions. Trump works to his power structure, but he puts the illusion of autonomy. And so, because I know that all our taxpayer money goes actually to the community, I don't mind paying tax. It's contribution to the community. Is the government supporting the community? Are we having less crime or more crime? Are we having better supply chains or worse supply chains? Is people's happiness, are people more happy or more depressed? Is there more drug addicts, or are there less people that are addicted to drugs? Is there higher suicide rates or lower suicide rates? Is there more degeneracy or less degeneracy? What's the birth rate?
Exactly the things that you want to focus on.
Yeah. I just want a bunch of happy people around me that are having children, that feel accountable to, some kind of social contract, whether that be God or whether that be community or whatever is right for you, that holds you accountable, genuinely accountable to a higher purpose, that isn't committing suicide, isn't addicted to drugs, and is having children and has some family values because, that's what the government's meant to be doing. But no, it serves bondholders. And so that's why I moved to an island where I thought, where is that happening? And so the less debt, the more likely it is to happen, because you're not servicing foreign interests. Underneath that, you have corporate structure. So one of the best ways to, protect yourself is to use corporate structure. The degree of autonomy that you have is, firstly, the balance sheet. Does the company have hard assets or paper assets? Is the money at a bank, or is the money in self-custody? What level of cash flow do you need to meet your autonomy requirements? Do you have to raise more finance to get to the next stage? If you have to raise finance, you're subordinate to equity capital. If you need more debt, then you're subordinate to debt capital. And if you have to go public, then you're going to be subordinate to the investment banks. If you don't have cash flow, then you're going to have to look to somewhere else to get your capital. If you don't have assets on your balance sheet, then you're not going to be able to survive turbulence. And so, it's simple accounting at the corporate level. And then at the individual level as well, who do I owe money to? Who owns my property? Does the bank own it, or do I own it? Who do I work for if I take on more? If I'm borrowing against my Bitcoin, who's the custodian? Who gets to margin call me? who controls the short-term price, and do I have reserve Bitcoin to meet that margin call? So the further you go down into these financial weapons of mass destruction, the less autonomy and less sovereignty you have. And so again, it's a spectrum.
Yes.
And my job is, in every decision, you should be asking, is this better or is this worse?
Yeah.
I'm not happy. I have to use an iPhone with AI on it.
Yeah.
But should I be running my own LLM? Yes, I know I should. Am I going to do it? Yes, eventually. I need to create an infrastructure. You ask yourself, do I own Bitcoin? Is that at Coinbase? Is that better than BlackRock? Or should I have it in self-custody? Have I got my self-custody structure yet? Okay, that might take me the next year to be comfortable, engage in the community, put together a plan. What's the tax consequences of me buying Bitcoin in an ETF and then trying to figure out selling that ETF, then taking the dollars, putting it in a bank, then getting the bank into an exchange, and then the exchange into buying Bitcoin, and then the Bitcoin off the exchange into self. Wow, that's a pretty complex process. So, okay, yeah, I want Bitcoin exposure, but should I try and get the right setup? Again, these are all decisions, and you'll get it wrong. I've made every mistake under the sun. I've been scammed by everybody. I've gone down the wrong routes, but in the end, you will be sovereign if you own your Bitcoin in self-custody, and then eventually you're asking, well, am I subject to core developers? Do I trust these core developers? Am I subject to miners? And then you go down and understand how the ecosystem works. Okay, how do I get more sovereign? All right, maybe I want to run my own nodes. Maybe I actually want to vote. Maybe I want to verify my own transactions. Then you're like, what about miners? Maybe I want to do a bit of self-mining and connect to a more decentralized mining pool. Again, if you try and get this right from the beginning, you're going to be overwhelmed into perfection. And perfection is the mother of all, the enemy of all advancement.
Yeah.
It's just, is this better or is it worse?
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. Okay, I want to get to at least two more things with you before we have to get off. So one of the things you shared is that in the beginning of your career journey is you worked in City of London, and you have the lived experience of how the compromise is being done, whether it's, so that's what I'm curious on, blackmail, extortion, threats, like, have you seen all that stuff, and at the high political or institutional levels, are they really exposed to all that and they have to be exposed to it if they want to advance? Or is it possible to stay clean when they're at that level? And I want to know if it's real. Look, we're seeing this with the Epstein files now, but it kind of feels like it's them over there, these elites, that elite class that we are not connected to. But you've seen it from the financial side and in the City of London. How does it work there? Is it really like that everywhere, even the lower levels?
No, the higher you want to rise within these control grids, the more compromised you have to be. If you want Trump's job, you got to be very compromised. If you want to do what Thomas Massey's doing right now, you need to work for a level of power that benefits from the Epstein files being released. And if you want to take Trump's job, all of that ideology is going to go away. So if you want Thomas Massey, as he is today, to be president, impossible, ain't going to happen. If you want to be included in the S&P 500, Michael Saylor, you know what you have to face in order to get there, because you are doing it within a Wall Street construct. If you want to be an executive of an investment bank, then the way that compromise, and by the way, Epstein is taking the toll right now. I'll give you why I think it is. It's because I think it's part of the strategic weakening of the dollar operation. They're trying to destroy America right now and turn it into a civil war. And they're also trying to defang some of the radical ideologies and expose some of the Israeli deep state the American deep state, the evangelical Christians that are saying, you've got this generational thing where the boomers were radicalized into this evangelical Christian ideology to support Zionism, which is a tool for the military industrial complex, if you haven't figured it out. Like, people think like Israel rules the world. No, Israel is subordinate to its own corrupt power structure, just like America is, just like UK is, just like the rest of the West is. And the military industrial complex has these blackmail operations and various other things. Now, people think it's like Jeffrey Epstein is like a one-off. There's thousands of Jeffrey Epsteins. There's thousands of them. And his job was to demonstrate utility to the network. And the more utility you can demonstrate to the network by persuading people, or not even persuading, providing services for sick people that are so rich that they've hit the level of the only thing that gives me more satisfaction is using my money to engage in worse and worse crimes against humanity, to the point where I become so extreme that I'm doing things that I don't even want to talk about right now. These networks of Jeffrey Epstein, okay, so you want to be introduced to this person. Well, to get to those levels, how do we know that you're going to be the right type of person? Well, first, let's just start with some money. So I'll invest in your company. Then once I invest in your company, let's build a relationship. Hey, by the way, do you want to come to one of my house? I got some escorts there. Go enjoy yourself. And then you take them further and further down the chain. And if you want to get to the top, you've got things that are on Hunter Biden's laptop. You've got pasts that we know about Trump. You've got emails from Elon Musk making orders on Epstein Island while pretending Jeffrey Epstein was trying to get him on the island. You've got Howard Lutniks, that are pretending that this was some sick individual while he was listing the age of his children and going to the island, and suddenly you're protected. There's only one. I tell you how I know this. In 2016, there was a hack of Bitfinex for 120,000 Bitcoin. And I decided that we would use our structure to help the victims, and we put together a structure, a security token that meant that it didn't need to go into bankruptcy. And we made a construct that compensated victims many times over. But we ended up a shareholder in Bitfinex. And we saw what happened to Tether. It was weaponized by taking out banks. Regulations were used in order to create a hole. That hole then led to a financial construct where lawfare was then used. Lawfare is then used in order to compromise you further and further. And as you get compromised further and further and further, you have a choice. Your choice is die or grow. You get taken out if you don't continue to be useful to power, or you corrupt further. And then you end up with Cantor Fitzgerald holding all of your bonds. And now you're deep into the system. And you decide that you want to become as big as Tether is. You don't get to play those games without being part of power. You don't get to survive. And so same in the career in this finance side. So the answer is, I'm sorry, I'm very black-pilled. Everywhere I look, I see the same thing. Mm-hmm. But there is an empowerment in understanding how the system works. There's a disappointment in delusion. Because you either ignore this shit and then you become a part of the problem, a cog in a wheel, or you understand the problem so that you can boycott it and exit. Yeah. And I know that there are parts, because I understand how the system works, I know there are part of my life that has to be a part. My money at a bank is contributing to evil. Mm-hmm. Point blank. I know it, but I still need some money at a bank to not have currency risk. So various things. It's again, I know that for me to have this technology, I'm participating in evil, but that technology hopefully makes me more productive, where I can reallocate some of that energy and money into something that might actually make a difference. And this comes down to, I think, a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
I think this is how I think the world works. In my map of the world, you don't understand good until you can't understand good without evil. And so evil is the polar opposite of good, and you need all of it. And the world is not meant to eliminate all evil. We are just presented with evil and good. And then we have a choice. And our choice is, do I continue? Do I ignore? Or do I make an intent to do a better decision? And that's a test. And one day we all meet our maker and we have to explain whether we passed the test or failed the test. And so I don't think you fix the world. I don't think Bitcoin fixed the world. But I think it gives you an option to exit. And I think it gives you an option to boycott. And I think it gives you an option to take that energy and channel your money into something that is better. And my experience has been, every time I've made that decision, I remember borrowing against my Bitcoin through Celsius, thinking it's a good idea rather than selling some Bitcoin. And I got punished for it. You know, I spent the next 2 years of my life helping victims. It was the most educational experience. It made the fabric of my understanding of how the world works. Because I lent into it. I made the wrong decision, and the world gave me that test. And my test was, do I just become the elite and just say, okay, I'll sit in the background and do nothing? Or do I use this in order to support the other people, just like my father? And during this Celsius bankruptcy, it was June the 12th, 2022. My father passed away the same day that Celsius shut the doors on 650,000 people, a $25 billion Ponzi scheme. And shortly after that, when I came out and said, you know what, I just found out I'm the 7th largest creditor in this bankruptcy. Mizhinsky stole money and, he owes me 45 million. I borrowed against some Bitcoin. It's not going to change my life. But I got message after message from people that had put their entire life savings into this thing. I met people that committed suicide because they couldn't face their wife and tell them they'd lost their whole lifetime savings. I met people that moved country because they couldn't afford to live. And they had to figure out how to, because they thought the money was about to come back. And they were waiting week after week thinking, it's coming, it's coming. They couldn't face the reality of what had happened to them. I had pensioner after pensioner that needed to come out of retirement because Mizhinsky told them, put everything here. Put your entire, they emptied out their 401k, bought a stable coin and lent the whole thing thinking that they were getting a safe yield. Mizhinsky went, and I had a pensioner that went to Miami, looked Mizhinsky in the face and said, this is everything I've got. I need this money. Is it safe to do this? He didn't say, this is a risky hedge fund. You know, you should only put a small allocation into this. He said, put it all in, do everything. And, there were people that reminded me of my father. My father passed away on that day. And I said, I got to continue this mission.
Yeah.
I got to continue this work and help people understand what happened to their money. And so for 2 years, I read 4,000 court documents. I publicly described everything. I participated in the court process, managed to get the judge not to sell people's Bitcoin. In FTX, they sold all the Bitcoin. Managed to get it out of bankruptcy so they didn't steal all the upside of the Bitcoin, and discovered 2 years of the sheer corruption that was involved in the bankruptcy process. And I think it was the vital training that kind of led to, the next phase of understanding and being involved in anti-war advocacy. And
Thank you so much for sharing what you shared. Do you think that the reason Daniel Leon is not with the same verdict as Mashinsky is because of his subordination to powers in Israel? Like, to me, it's just my mind, I cannot comprehend how this guy can be now free and just doing his next startup with everything that has happened. What do you think? Why is that?
So this is when I really first discovered, this power structure and dynamic around the jurisdiction of Israel. Firstly, you get you expose power, and the first thing Alex Mashinsky's wife did is weaponized anti-Semitism and said that I'm anti-Semitic. That's the first thing you find out that happens. Mm-hmm. Then I looked into the real structure. It turns out that there was a back office in Israel, in Celsius. The co-founder, Daniel Leon, has now got an AI startup with the Prime Minister's Office of Israel. He didn't go to prison. He was in Israel. His wife is effectively propaganda for the IDF and social media. I looked into one of the hacks that happened. It was through a company called Bankruptcy. And Bankruptcy, the shareholders were the niece and nephew of Benjamin Netanyahu. Victims' money was used to make an acquisition of a company called GK8, which is a custody service located in Israel. And the only person...
GK8 has managed to be acquired a second time after it lost money, like miraculously. It's a success story. There are no miracles in that industry. That doesn't happen just because, God loves them. So for people to understand. And the Ben-Alzi family is behind Bankruptcy. Ben-Alzi is the cousin of Netanyahu.
Okay, family. Thank you for that.
I mean, the Sarah Netanyahu, which is Netanyahu's wife, her brother, I think his name is Amatzia Ben-Alzi. He's an investor in many companies in Israel, including Bankruptcy, and his children, the boy and the girl, they're both in Bankruptcy. So they're more or less my age. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so they're protected. It's like, this is what I'm thinking of. I'm looking at Daniel Leon, like I'm looking at the whole case. I'm looking at how one person only gets, a verdict of 12 years in prison and the other one has nothing. And he's a co-founder. And I'm searching him in the Israeli media and news. He's celebrated as this tech entrepreneur. But what about the accountability? What about I don't know, how come he's walking free and the other one is in jail? So,
each one of those suicides, each one of those ruin of life, each one of those pensioners where their whole life was destroyed. You did that, Daniel Leon. And you need to be accountable to that, but you won't be because you have got your shelter.
That's what I feel. Yeah.
And, Alex Mashinsky went down for 12 years, but there was a whole power structure behind him as well.
Of course.
And so, this was really the kind of one of the another experience going through a 2-year bankruptcy process and going, I kind of go all in at each stage, and it kind of builds your building, it adds to your building blocks. And so,
of course,
we could go down a million different routes from here.
We have to do another part, if you will allow me, because I have so many questions from the audience that they would like to get your answers, but we don't have time for it now. So at a later point, I would love to do another part. I will, just take you to one more direction, which is, I think, important to some of my audience, and I want to be responsible and sensitive and apologize in advance if this is going to trigger some people, because if you're like me, Jewish and Israeli, but you are still connected to your national or religious identity in some way, then it may be hard for you to hear how things are working in and around Israel. And one of the things I really found fascinating is that a lot of the things you said around October 7th or the Iran 12 days war, things that are related to Israel and the Middle East specifically, were very similar to the things I was saying, but obviously I do not have your background and experience in terms of following the money and bringing the receipts from that side. I was saying all that stuff from a very, first of all, intuitive place, but secondly, my lived experience and the evidence that I was collecting from the ground, you know, and I also served in the IDF, so I had a very personal experience of being there, seeing how things work, knowing how the system is supposed to work versus how it was actually operating on October 7th. I actually did a lot of documenting and reporting about that specific incident because I had so much experience to talk about it. And after I've done that, I've been called names, and people, you know, they can't call me an anti-Semite, so they call me a self-hating Jew. There's such a thing. But what I find really interesting is when I look at Zionism, our system indoctrinates you to conflate Zionism with patriotism. And when you're educated, when you're a child and a teenager, you have this environment that's teaching you that being a Zionist is really being a patriot and being a good person. And so most of the people in Israel, they do not understand that Zionism is a political movement and what the aim of that movement is. And they haven't gone back in history to source its origins and why it operates the way it is and what kind of powers it's subordinate to. And so for me, growing up, I had this cognitive dissonance with being like lefty, a left-wing person, wanting peace with the Arabs in Palestine, and at the same time understanding that there is such a thing as an occupation of another, you know, other people. Like you're being a lefty, and you want to love your country and be a good patriot and be a Zionist, but how can you be both? How can you both, you know, be a left wing and want to respect other people's right to exist, and you don't want to control them. You want them to have their own autonomy, but at the same time, you're being told that you have to be a good boy or good girl and be a good Zionist. And so I could never settle the two. And the propaganda in Israel is so powerful. So when I came out and spoke about October 7th, I kind of understood how powerful the powers that are operating within Israel are, because even though I had known about some of the past history with the Yom Kippur War 50 years earlier to October 7th, I saw it with my own eyes, how the government or the security apparatus had enabled something like this to happen. And that shook me to the ground, because I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this was enabled, because from my experience, this is not supposed to happen. And I have all the receipts for that. And then I see someone like you that then goes to the other side and show, and obviously everything that, sorry that I'm a little bit mixed up, but what I'm seeing is that after October 7th, the whole thing that unfolded was predictable in my eyes. I said that this was enabled just so that we can go into Gaza and finish what we started, because Gaza was becoming a liability, and that they just want to create a new Middle East kind of order with foreign powers to come back again and negotiate how the region's going to look like. And Israel is a very important strategic asset in that negotiation. So this had to happen at one point, and now is the time for it to happen. And people were sacrificed on both sides. They have no care for human lives. And then you start the anti-Semitism card, you know, just like you said that you were weaponized personally by that lady telling you straight away that you're an anti-Semite if you're starting to criticize the government of Israel. And then it becomes a global thing and everyone's anti-Semite, and then it's a whole problem. And then you have all these false flag operations that are happening around the world that are justifying even more that there's anti-Semitism. And I'm not saying that there isn't, there is, but it's just being sparked. And it's being created at a certain time to serve a certain goal. And then you get the whole world saying, oh, it's because the Zionism are the evil of the world, and Israel and the Jewish people are controlling the world. And, you know, and there you have it. You kind of achieved something, which I don't understand why they do it. From my lived experience, it is not possible for Israel to control the world or Zionism to control the world. Yes, they have a lot of power. And yes, I am the first one to criticize the place where I'm coming from. But there is such a level of degeneracy and mediocrity in Israel and in Zionism that there is no way that small cabal can manage the world or control the world. It just doesn't work that way. That's why your theory of this interwoven complex of relationship between the three different complexes with different facets of power operating differently in Israel and in other places in the Middle East and in the world makes so much more sense for me than that theory of, the Jews and the Zionists just control the world. So I'm sorry that was a long rant, but I kind of wanted to compare notes with you on that.
Yeah, we could almost do a whole podcast on that.
I know.
And we probably should. Why not?
Sure.
But so cognitive dissonance is the right word. So firstly, you have to understand how the world really works. Like, Netanyahu has a job, and his job isn't to work for Israel, even though most people think it is. He might as well work for Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, and various other power structures, and the Israeli military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
So, he has a power structure, and people think that the president or the prime minister is in charge. They're not in charge. Their job is a battering ram for power. Their job is to do what power who they work for is telling them to do, and they have to find an acceptable way of presenting that to the public facing people. So Trump doesn't rule America. Trump's job is to repackage massive policy into MAGA and make people think this is nationalistic in the interest of the average American. That's his job. In the meantime, who does he work for? He works mainly for the financial industrial complex, who strategically is a global transnational capital. And no, it's not Israel. And Israel doesn't run the Federal Reserve. There is transnational capital is the countries that use their resources to build sovereign wealth, that partner with a central banking structure, which is the Bank for International Settlements. The Bank for International Settlements is the higher the GDP of your country, the bigger a shareholder you become. And so the largest node is the Federal Reserve. So then you have a plausible deniability story, right? The Federal Reserve is the most important node in the Bank for International Settlements. Now, if you want to create a blame shift story, you say the Bank for International Settlements, that's the Brits and the Europeans, and Trump is taking on the legacy banking structure. That's a narrative, okay? The Federal Reserve is the most important node in the Bank for International Settlements. Who owns the Federal Reserve? And then we'll get back to how it comes to Israel. The banks. So the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are the banks. What are the banks? They're public companies. What are public companies? They're owned by the asset managers as the largest shareholders. Who are the asset managers? Well, the largest pools of capital like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and a bunch of foreign sovereign wealth funds. And so capital at the end of the day is you got to look at the shareholder class. Who are the shareholders in those? Well, legacy power. This is where you go down and you realize that there's wealthy families and they have trust structures via Cayman Islands and all of these trust structures. So legacy power was the Rothschild dynasty, a very powerful force. Yes, but we're not in the 19th century anymore. This is in the 18th and 19th century. There is remnants of that power, but they represented European power. European power has been strategically weakened. There was, with the rise of the American empire, a whole Rockefeller and JP Morgan, and they connected with European power in order to manage this transition. That built wealth within the US military industrial complex, within the technical industrial complex. And so you have shifts in power and relative power based upon your wealth. Some of them ended up with a bunch of gold, others ended up with a bunch of debt. Okay. So you have this network of wealth that is the shareholder class, and they are able to influence their holdings through their shareholdings and board positions. Okay. But then what happened? We had globalism. What did globalism lead to? The rise of China, the rise of India, the rise of other powers, the rise of sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East. And so because the Middle East, some countries were able to utilize their oil, they were able to build a sovereign wealth fund and partner with the financial industrial complex. Other countries, they gained their power by being connected to the military industrial complex. Israel went through that transition. It was originally a land where Jewish people, Muslim people, and Christians lived in relative peace. There was an Ottoman Empire. There's 3,000 years of history, but none of that's relevant. That's narrative. There were people on that land, and Jews, Muslims, and Christians didn't really hate each other. But then you had foreign interference from the British Empire. You had Turkish interference from an Ottoman Empire. You had power dynamics, and you had financial families like the Rothschilds that back certain factions of power. There were wars, and there were terrorist groups that received weapons. They were called Haganah. They became the IDF. They also were narratived into an ideology, because you don't recruit an army. A power doesn't recruit an army of, like, look at right now, there's no ideology in UK, and the British army is useless. It's just technology and military and manufacturing. But there's no Brit that wants to ideologically fight for its country and Ukraine and all this stuff, because you need ideology to recruit power, and religious ideology was the most important power. The original Europeans that came to America, they were doing a genocide and ethnic cleansing because they thought that they were the chosen Christians and they were escaping religious persecution. And, and therefore they were okay genociding and ethnically cleansing the Native Americans for power. And those power were, the wealthy and rich that were building everything that gave the American empire its later power. All right. So you had, Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Palestine that was occupied by the British Empire after the Ottoman Empire. And you had a narrative. And you had power that were pulling the strings. And power was funding militia groups, creating false flags, and creating an environment that led to wars. Those wars were profitable to power. There were people that would gain financial interest that would gain power. It became an outpost for power to have a jurisdiction in order to engage in activities that couldn't be done in other countries. And Israel effectively became an outpost for the US military industrial complex. And then there were power within America. There is, just like there's an Italian mafia, there's a Jewish mafia. They're in New York. And that Jewish mafia is utilizing its power to utilize Israel in order to get away with it, any crimes against humanity, wrap it up in jurisdictional arbitrage, just like Daniel Leone did, and utilize that power. It needs to become useful to power. What utility does it do? Well, maybe it becomes a testing ground for weapons. Maybe it becomes a testing ground for managing a surveillance state and an occupation. Maybe there are companies within Israel that can profit from that, gain access to Pentagon budgets, take that money, test technology that couldn't be tested in America, test it in Israel, train and fund militia groups, fuel religious tensions by funding Western-backed proxies like ISIS and Al-Qaeda have infiltration of Turkey, of Iran, of Saudi Arabia, of all these different countries, and use Israel and use Iran and use Turkey and use Saudi and use all these countries as a divide and conquer mission so that the American empire can grow. That money then gets recycled. The debt remains with the American people. Every war creates trillions of dollars of revenue. You have plausible deniability. You can at every stage say it wasn't us, it was them. But then you also radicalize people. You radicalized Muslims by manufacturing wars and creating false flag operations, which 9/11 was. You then radicalized Jews into thinking that they're fighting for their survival. And then you radicalize evangelical Christians in America to create the religious justification for the war, thinking you're defending democracy. And now you've got a radicalized Christian group, a radicalized Muslim group, and a radicalized Jewish group that are all useful idiots to power. Mix them all up, shake it all up, and you can destabilize the Middle East so that they can't build sovereign wealth. You are forced onto the petrodollar. You assassinate King Faisal or anything like that tries to resist power. You then create a shadow government called Safari Club, which works for CIA, Mossad, MI6. And then you funnel all the money back into propping up the US stock market and the Israeli stock market. The average people end up with the debt. You privatize all the companies, put them on the stock market, and then you prop up the dollar, you prop up the petrodollars. So at the power level, that's what's happening. At the government level, they work for power. They don't work for the people. Their job is to put an acceptable narrative to get population growth, recruit an army, make them think that everything they're doing is noble, deserved, justified, spiritual, religious, when really you're doing incredible evil activities for power without knowing who you work for. It's the concept of a useful idiot. Most people don't know who they work for. Yeah. Most people have no idea because this is all done by plausible deniability, shadow funding structures. There are a bunch of people that believe that they are fighting a resistance. But what's the Iranian model? The Iranian and Israel conflict made trillions of dollars for the US and Israeli military industrial complex. It also created a shadow mafia sanctioned mafia network where the people in power in Iran benefit from strategic tension. Now, most people think they're resisting. They are useful idiots for power. Others think that they're part of some, radicalized Islamist state thing. Useful idiots for power. Got nothing to do with Islam. These are CIA operatives. You saw that. Look at Gilani. The person that used to head up ISIS is now the head of Syria, meeting in the White House. And Syria is basically funded by, the Gulf Cooperation Council and Turkish interest. Now, because he used to work for ISIS, which is connected to covert Israeli, Mossad operations, people think he works for Israel. But no, he works for Turkey and the GCC. Now, all this to say is that I could go on forever, and I do go on every week. I cover this, what's really happening by following the money. All this to say is that the most useful power is divide and conquer, and division is always the mechanism that power profits from. And those, Netanyahu's just a middle person. He's an indispensable asset. He can be replaced. He can be assassinated. He can be regime changed. If he doesn't do what the military industrial complex want him to do, and there was a mission, which is get rid of the Palestinians. Here's your job description. How do you do it? Well, October the 7th was very useful to try and get rid of the Palestinians. And so you allow October the 7th to happen. And if you don't think that false flags are, done for military profits, then you don't know how the world really works. Because all of those wars in the Middle East made someone trillions of dollars. Where's the debt? The debt is the American person. The value is in the US stock market, and there are a bunch of corruption in the middle that all got their cut for being useful to power. And so Netanyahu doesn't work for the Israeli people. I mean, if you really think about it, Zionism and Israel as an ideology is probably the worst thing that could ever happen to the Jewish people from my perspective, because it's just population growth for power, where you join the IDF and then you have to engage in covert operations, the ethnic cleansing, and acquisition of resources via the Israeli and US military industrial complex to divide and conquer. Effectively, you're just being used for power.
So I've been part of it. I was in the IDF. I saw with my own eyes what wars are for and how it's working, and I'm the living experience of that thing. It's not worth it for anyone, but when you propagandize people so well, you can use them. And yes, Zionism and the project called the State of Israel, which I am part of, and it is my home, and I will return there to my family and friends. It doesn't make me love the place less by saying it, but it is a very bad experiment. It is a very bad project. And I believe that my grandparents were manipulated and duped to be Zionists and to want to fight for that country and to build it. I'm not saying that the Jewish people don't need a place or don't need protection, but it's just that project benefit on the backs of millions of people that don't even know that they are being played.
The only reason that the brand of Zionism effectively turned into what I call a toxic asset is because power decided to show people what it was. Mm-hmm. And so the ethnic cleansing that happened to the Palestinians and the crimes against humanity and the attempted but failed genocide, from my perspective, I know that these might be triggering words. Sorry for your audience, but I believe that that's what was meant to happen because Netanyahu had a job description and he failed with that job description. Mm-hmm. But it's because the military industrial complex, which is who he worked for, was actually having a power struggle with the financial industrial complex. And the financial industrial complex wants regional stability in the Middle East. Why? Because they're taking the tactics that they used in the Middle East and the global South and Asia, and they're bringing it back home to America right now because they want to usher in a police and surveillance state. So they need civil unrest in America, in UK, in Europe. They're taking the same tactics, and this is only 1% of it. If you think in the UK and America and in the West is bad right now, that quote unquote invasion was effectively people that are their countries were destroyed to prop up this dollar-based system. And they wanted some opportunity, so they ended up in America, and now they've escaped their country probably at the time when their country is going to go through growth, because the financial industrial complex is dumping the dollar right now and dumping America in partnership with the sovereign wealth funds, propped up by oil purchases of China to build this AI and surveillance police state that we're all building and participating in right now. And so transnational capital decided that it needs to purge some of its assets. And so there was a power struggle between the military industrial complex, which was the Greater Israel Project to destabilize the region, and the financial industrial complex that partnered with the sovereign wealth funds that said we need regional stability. Mm-hmm. And it's only because China rose that the American military had to negotiate via the financial industrial complex with China, because China's providing all the revenue with its manufacturing base for those sovereign wealth funds by buying oil. That gave them more power. And the financial industrial complex decided it's time to reset the order because we burdened the West with all the debt. And now we're asset stripping the West. And now we're just going to use them as the laboratory of Palantir technology that was tested in Gaza, that was tested in the West Bank. And so all the beta tests that were put on the global South are now coming home. And they're only going to give you 1% of it. People are freaking out right now. They're going mentally insane in the West, not having children, higher suicide rates, highest drug addictions, highest rates or lowest birth rates, highest mental illness like degeneracy, more OnlyFans prostitution, men that are addicted to pornography and can't have children, technology to destroy the family base, massive gambling, crypto scamming, like poly market, prediction market, all rampant degeneracy.
Yeah.
Because they're experiencing 1% of what the US military industrial complex did to the rest of the global South. And now they're reallocating their profit centers. And so, Netanyahu didn't meet his job description. And now he's trying to prove his utility by acquiring more land so that Western financial industrial complex can negotiate with the Gulf sovereign wealth funds and the BRICS countries that are now a rising power. And now the Middle East will most likely end up in regional stability because they managed to find a financial transaction that was more profitable than the death and destruction. And that's why the dollar's weakening right now. Because there is transnational capital is weakening the dollar to reset the world order.
Yeah. We have to do another episode just about that because there's so much more to dig here. But your prediction is that Israel and maybe Palestine are going to be controlled by the GCC going forward?
Yeah, I think what we're witnessing right now, at the moment, we're on off with US war with Iran. Netanyahu's visiting US right now. The narrative is that Netanyahu rules the world. He's middle management. He's a dispensable asset.
Of course.
And when you go to meet, so the narrative is that if you meet, oh, right, he rules the world. So he's visited Trump 8 times. When you are a world leader and everything's going the way you want it, you don't go and visit another world leader.
Oh, yeah.
You have to visit.
It's like going to the principal's office.
Yeah, you have to visit 8 times because things ain't going the way you want.
Absolutely.
And you have to try and fix the thing that's not going the way you want it to go. But people create this whole narrative. I wrote a blog called Do Jews Rule the World that goes through all the power dynamics and just trying to put people into realism. Look, all this to say we should go deeper. These are all interesting topics in understanding how the world works. But Iran is effectively economically dependent upon China right now. Israel has been turned into a pariah state hated by the rest of the world in many respects. That's a generational thing. And I think that both Palestine and Israel are going to be vassalized economically into the GCC while Iran becomes a dependency. And I think Iran has shed all its proxies already. And essentially at this stage, there is a vision for the region. And that vision is set by transnational capital, which is China, the sovereign wealth funds, and the US financial industrial complex. They want peace in the Middle East to make more money. And so that's my prediction for what happens over the next 5 years. And quite frankly, I prefer that to the military ruling the region.
Absolutely.
Even though I think it's unjust, but I can shout all I want. I just follow the money, and the money says this ain't going to be justice, but it's going to be better than what it was before. And so, I look forward to, I believe the Middle East will be the highest growth region in the next decades ahead. I think China is on track to become a superior economic power than America. I think the West is being asset stripped. The governments are fully subordinate to power. And I think the global South is going to have its opportunity to rise, but your proximity to America, i.e. Europe, Latin and Central America, are where the military is going to make up for lost profit, sadly. And so they want to profit from war the closer you are to the Western Hemisphere, while they're asset stripping and creating civil unrest in order to usher in this technocratic police and surveillance state. And so sadly, you could say sadly, but I believe that, again, spiritual money means that there are consequences to what's been inflicted on the world, and that has to come home to roost by the real power, which I believe is divine. And these are tests, and how we react to these things. Do we do good with it? Do we do bad with it? Do we speak truth even when it hurts us? And that's our test. And often we have to speak truth to things that are very destructive and very harmful to our self-interest.
Yeah.
But I think that's the test. And then you have to allocate your money and decide, am I going to be a part of this, or am I going to be able to exit it? And so in the end, for me, Bitcoin has become a mission of, I think Bitcoin in custody has been co-opted by power, and we don't take down the system, but we do get to exit from the system and become sovereign ourselves, because elites want Bitcoin in self-custody, but they want you to custody it, and they want you in debt, borrowing against it, and becoming a degenerate altcoin gambler. That's what they want. So you just need to do the opposite of what they want.
You're a living example of what you were saying, because even if it's not in your best interest, you still speak the truth. And the way you have taken your life's mission and purpose, and you're just in service to the community and to humanity by doing what you're doing. So I'm wrapping up this part one of us speaking, because I'm looking forward to the next opportunity where we can sit down and I can pick your brain even more and ask you all the audience questions I have. But I give you a huge virtual hug and big thank you for everything you do. I think you are amazing, and thank you for doing what you're doing. And I look forward to staying in touch and doing it again.
Yeah, no problem. The challenge is people can't get nuance. They really want, we've been indoctrinated, particularly in the West, in order to pick a team and just go with our team no matter what happens. The reality is that countries can be simultaneously enemies and friends at the same time in different areas. And geopolitics doesn't work like humans, and there are times when Iran and Israel is working together. You can see that in Iran-Contra affair. They benefit from intelligence sharing in certain things. But here's the thing. The boogie monster is never how the world really works. Everything in media is a function of who controls that media and what do they want you to believe. There's no independent media. Algorithms are what they need you to be radicalized into in this new world. And everything a politician says is the complete opposite of reality. The only truth, even in the Epstein files, you got a bunch of emails, but the truth is the financial transactions, and you're not going to get those because that incriminates the people that actually control the Epstein files. And it's not Trump, and it's not the Department of Justice. I can assure you, it's greater powers that are still using it. So we'll continue in another, but it's in the nuanced conversations is what I wanted to say, that if you find yourself tribal, you're probably a useful idiot. Because everyone, when you tell the truth, everyone hates you. Look, I'm very emotionally connected to the Palestinian cause, but am I going to continue lying about things because it helps the cause? No. All we can do is help people understand the nuance, because other people are weaponizing the cause. And if you give energy to those that are weaponizing the cause, then you're continuing the problem and you're not helping solve the problem. And in doing that, everyone will hate you. I guarantee you, every side, because if we don't, is going to hate us from this conversation. But who cares? Who cares?
Exactly. Who cares? I always say I'm on team human. I don't give a fuck about all this left, right, and
that's what Bitcoin was. It was FU money in the end of the day. My company is free. I'm free. And, my country is as free as it can be. So that's what allows me to talk to this stuff. And I will never commit suicide in case I don't come back, by the way. Somebody would take me out if they did. I don't think I'm that important. But I'm definitely having conversations. So if I disappear, it's not because I commit suicide.
Yeah, same here. I learned so much from you. So keep going, please. You're doing amazing work.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. People should follow you. I will tell you. On X, on Nostr, you are not very active, but you have an account. And the SimonDixon.com website, everything is there. And the YouTube channel is magnificent. So you can follow Simon in all of these channels. And there's a newsletter, website. You can sign up and get his stuff also by email. So did I cover everything?
Yeah, and I'm meant to be promoting my podcast now as well. So Apple and Spotify as well. Just putting Simon
Apple
Dixon.
and Spotify. Simon Dixon Hard Talk. Bitcoin Hard Talk. You rebranded.
I end up talking 5% about Bitcoin because it's a solution.
It's a solution,
but then 95% about everything else.
So it's Simon Dixon Hard Talk. Go follow the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Thank you so much. We're going to do this again. Hopefully next time also in real life. So in person. That would be a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you.